In this video, you will learn how to use the copy, move, remove, touch, and make directory commands needed to manage your computer's file system. Hello, I'm Jeffrey Sessoms. Welcome to Lesson 2 of my command line course. The lessons of this course will build upon the knowledge and skills demonstrated in earlier lessons. So if I use a command that you're unfamiliar with or don't explain in this lesson, then be sure to watch the earlier lessons of this course or specific command tutorials for help. If you want to follow along with the lesson, then I placed a link in the description to a repository where the content can be downloaded, as well as a link to a PDF containing all of the commands covered in the course that you can use as a reference. There are also timestamps in the description if you want to skip to a specific point in the video. Let's get to it. The first command we'll learn to use is the cp command, which is short for copy. The cp command copies a file or directory and has two forms. In the first form, the source argument is the name of the file or directory that cp will copy. The destination argument is the name that cp will assign to the new copy. In the second form, the source list arguments are a list of one or more files or directories that cp will copy. The destination argument is the directory name where the copies will be placed. Now, before we continue, I should caution you that using the cp command to copy a source file to a destination file that already exists will cause the existing destination file to be overwritten, losing its contents. So I'll be sure to show you how to avoid that in just a moment. First, let's see a simple example of how the copy command works using the first form. Currently, my working directory is Documents, where I have several files that I want to copy. The list command shows that we have several text files and two directories called Messages and Party. To make a copy of the memo file here, we can enter the command cp memo _copy. Remember from our syntax for the command that our source file goes first. It's our first argument to the cp command. The second argument is the destination file where we want to copy our source file to. Currently, you'll notice that memo copy doesn't exist here in our Documents directory. But after we execute this command, we'll list the contents again, and we should see it here. So, after executing the command, if we list the contents of the directory again, we can see that a new copy of the memo file was successfully made. Now, we aren't limited to copying files in our working directory only. Remember from Lesson 1 on command line navigation that commands can accept relative and absolute paths to resources outside our working directory. That means the copy command can also be used to copy a file from one directory to another. To see an example of that, let's clear our screen and list the contents of the Messages directory here. Right now in our Messages directory, you can see that it contains some files like greeting, groceries, guests, and some directories like history, invitations, and templates. Listing the contents of the working directory, you can see that there's a file here called email. Now, to copy the email file from our working directory, Documents, to the Messages directory here, we can enter the command cp email messages/email. If you remember from our command syntax, we're using the cp command, no options. Our first argument is the source file we'd like to copy, And the second argument is the destination file, where we would like to copy our email file to. If we list the contents of the messages directory again, we can see that the email file was indeed successfully copied to messages. Real quick, let's just back up and review what just happened. So when we listed the contents of the messages directory earlier, you can see that the email file did not exist. Then we listed the contents of our working directory documents, where we found our source file that we wanted to copy email. And within this directory, we have the messages directory where we wanted to copy email to. Then we copied our email file to the messages directory, listed the contents of messages, and we can see that it was successfully written there. Now, a moment ago, I said that if we weren't careful, we could accidentally overwrite an existing destination file, potentially losing hours of work and valuable data. Let's clear the screen and I'll show you what I mean. On the screen, I've just listed the contents of our working directory documents, which contains a few files and the messages directory. I've also listed the contents of the messages directory here, which contains a number of files, a few directories, and in the messages directory, notice that there already exists a file named memo with a last modified timestamp here of September 22nd, 2050. Observe what happens when we attempt to copy the email file from the documents directory to the messages directory as a file called memo. So to do that, we can enter cp email messages / memo. So again, going back to our command syntax, we have our cp command, our source file that we wish to copy, and the destination file where we wish to copy the email file to. So in other words, it'll copy the contents of email to this destination file called memo. If we list the contents of the messages directory again, we can see that the last modified timestamp of our memo file has changed. So before, our memo timestamp was September 22nd, 2050. Now it's just become September 23rd, 2211. That's because we have just overwritten the previous memo file with a copy of the email file that we named memo. In other words, whatever data the previous memo file contained is lost. So to keep from accidentally overwriting a file, we can use the list command to avoid choosing a file name that already exists, or we can pass the interactive option to the copy command. Let's clear the screen and see how that works. Once again, I've listed the contents of our working directory, documents, and its child directory, messages. And here we can see that messages contains a number of files and some directories. In particular, we can see that messages contains this file called greeting, which has a last modified timestamp of September 22nd, 2050. Observe what happens when we attempt to copy the email file from the working directory to our messages directory as greeting. This time, passing the interactive option. To do that, we'll enter cp-i email messages /greeting. Notice that by passing option I, the copy command displays this interactive prompt before the existing file is overwritten. This allows us to choose whether or not we actually want to overwrite that file. To overwrite the file, we can simply enter Y for yes. Otherwise, to keep the existing file and abort the copy operation, we can enter N for no. Since we do not want to overwrite the existing file, I'll enter N. Now, if we list the contents of messages this time, we'll see that the last modified date time hasn't changed at all, saving us from overwriting that existing file. So let's enter ls-l messages to take a look at that. So you can see that initially we had greeting with the timestamp of September 22nd, 2050. We executed the copy command with option I. We were prompted whether or not we want to actually overwrite that existing file, where we chose no. Then we listed the contents of messages again. And here you can see that the last modified timestamp for the greeting file hasn't changed at all. So here you can see that the interactive option is a very useful option that can save you a lot of time and potentially keep you from losing hours of work by overwriting an existing file. So now that you've seen that, let's clear the screen and see an example of the copy command's second form that allows multiple files to be copied to a directory. To copy multiple files to a directory, we begin with the cp command, followed by a list of source files to copy, separated by spaces, of course. Then end by passing the destination file where we want the files copied to. For example, in our working directory, Documents, we have the file Resume Backup. We also have the Messages directory. The contents of this directory is listed down here, where we have another file, Guests, and another directory called History. So what we'd like to do is copy the Resume Backup file to this History directory. But we'd also like to copy this Guests file here in the Messages directory to the History directory as well. So to do that, we can enter cp resume underscore backup messages / guests messages / history. So to review the syntax, we have cp, a list of source files that we'd like to copy, and then the destination where we'd like to copy Resume Backup and Guests to. If we list the contents of the directory history, ls-l messages / history, we can see that both files were successfully copied over. Let's clear the screen. So far, we have only used the copy command to copy files. Before we move on to the next command, let's see an example of how to copy a directory. Remember from lesson 1 on command line navigation that even the simplest directory contains two hidden items: a symbolic reference to itself with a single period, and a symbolic reference to its parent directory with the double period. This means that copying a directory always involves copying multiple items, potentially many files and directories at a time, instead of just a single file. So, to copy a directory, we need to pass the recursive option -r to the copy command. This allows the copy command to copy recursively by descending into the source directories and copying files to corresponding destination directories. For example, to copy the directory messages along with its contents, we can enter the command cp-r messages private messages. Reviewing the syntax, we can see that we have the cp command, the recursive option -r, our source directory that we'd like to copy, and the destination directory that we'd like to copy messages along with its contents too. If we list the contents of documents, messages, and private messages with ls-l, documents, messages, private messages, we can see that in our working directory, documents, we have our message directory, which was successfully copied over to the private messages directory. Furthermore, you can see that the contents of messages is displayed here. And you can also see that those contents were successfully copied over to the private messages directory. Let's clear the screen. The second command we'll learn to use is mv, which is short for move. The move command can be used to rename files and to move one or more files or directories, and it has three forms. In the first form, the existing file argument is the name of the file that mv will move. The new file name argument is the new file name that mv will assign to the existing file. In the second form, the existing file list arguments are a list of one or more files or directories that mv will move. The directory argument is the name of the directory where the existing files will be placed. And in the third form, the existing directory argument is the name of the directory that mv will move. The new directory argument is the new directory name that mv will assign to the existing directory. Before we continue, I should caution that, like cp, using the move command to move a source file to a destination where the file already exists will cause the existing destination file to be overwritten, losing its contents. Just like cp, the mv command also has an interactive option to avoid overwriting files, which I'll show in just a moment. First, let's see how the move command can be used to rename a file. Listing the contents of our working directory, we see there's a file called memo that we want to rename to memo draft. To rename it, we can enter the command mv memo draft. Let's take a quick look at the syntax. First, we have the mv command. The first argument is the existing file that we wish to rename. The second argument is the new file name that we want to rename memo to. Now let's look at the result. Notice the file name memo no longer appears in the directory because it was successfully renamed to memo draft. Now let's see how to use the move command to move a file from one directory to another. First, let's change our working directory to messages where we have several files that don't belong using cd messages. Next, let's list the content of messages with ls-l. So here in messages, we have this groceries file that we want to move from our working directory messages to its parent directory documents. To do that, we can enter the command mv groceries ... Looking at the syntax, you can see that we have our move command mv. We have as our first argument the file that we want to move. And as the last argument, we have the destination directory where we want to move groceries to. All right, let's execute that command. Using ls on our current directory, you can see that messages no longer has the groceries file. Now, if we list the contents of documents, we find that our groceries file was successfully moved there. Let's clear the screen. Let's see an example of how to use the move command to move one directory to another. First, let's list the contents of our working directory messages. So in our working directory, we have this directory called templates that we would like to move to our parent directory, documents. From the templates file type, here you can see that it is indeed a directory. So to move templates to documents, we can enter the command mv templates ~/documents. Reviewing the syntax, you can see that we're using the move command mv. The first argument to the command is the directory we want to move. And the last argument here is the path to the directory we want to move our templates directory to. In this case, we're using the symbolic reference of our home directory to access our documents directory, similar to what we have here. So executing that command and then displaying the contents of documents, we can see that our templates directory was successfully moved there. And just to be thorough, let's go ahead and list the contents of our current directory. And in our messages directory, you can see that we no longer have a file that exists called templates. All right, let's clear the screen. As I said earlier, be careful using the move command because it can overwrite files, causing you to lose hours of work or valuable data. For example, if we enter ls-l, you can see that in our working directory, we have a file called resume with a last modified timestamp of September 22nd, 2050. This resume we intend to send to a specific company. Now, if we enter the command ls-l ~/documents, then we see that in the parent directory, documents, there is another version of our resume with a last modified timestamp of October 2nd, 2222 that we intend to send to a completely different company. Observe what happens when we attempt to move the resume file from our messages directory with the September timestamp to our parent directory, Documents, which has this October timestamp. To do that, we can enter mv resume ~documents. Looking at the syntax, you can see we're using our move command, mv. First argument is the file that we would like to move, and the last argument is the destination directory where we want to move our resume file to. All right, so if we execute that command, then list the contents of our documents directory using ls-l documents. On the surface, nothing appears to have changed, but looking carefully, we can see that the last modified timestamp of our resume has changed. If you didn't catch that, let's review what just happened. We listed the contents of our messages directory here, which has one version of our resume that we want to send to a company with the September timestamp. Then we listed the contents of our documents directory, which has another version of our resume with this October timestamp. We then moved the resume from our messages directory to our documents directory. Then we listed the contents of our documents directory once again. Now we see that this last modified timestamp of our secondary version of our resume has changed. That's because we have just overwritten the previous version of the resume that we plan to send to the other company. So whatever contents was there is lost. Let's reset things as they were and see how we can use the interactive option -I to avoid overwriting our resume. First, let's move the resume file back to messages by entering the command mv ~documents/resume. Next, we'll enter the symbolic reference to our current directory with this dot here so that we can move the resume file back to our working directory. Okay, next, let's restore the original resume file and the documents directory from the resume backup file, also found there using the cp command copy. So cp ~documents/resume backup ~documents/resume. All right, let's verify that things have been reset correctly in our working directory messages with ls-l. Okay, things look good here. We have our resume file restored with the September timestamp. Now, let's check our documents directory with ls-l ~documents. Things look good here. We have October timestamp for our resume with a different timestamp since we just restored it from our backup. And of course, this has remained the same. So things are looking good. Now, if you downloaded the resources that go along with this course and are following along, don't worry if your timestamps don't match. It's more important to understand the concept of how a file can accidentally be overwritten. So now that we have things reset, let's clear the screen and use the interactive option -I to avoid overwriting the resume file in our documents directory. This time we'll enter mv -I resume ~documents Now let's review what we're trying to do. So we're using the move command mv. We're passing in the -I or interactive option to prevent us from accidentally overwriting one of our files. The next argument is the resume file in our current directory that we want to move. And the last argument is the destination directory where we want to move our resume file to. So if we execute this command, here we can see that instead of automatically overwriting the resume file found in Documents, we are prompted to choose whether or not to overwrite the existing file found there. To overwrite the file, simply enter Y for yes. Otherwise, to keep the existing file and abort the move operation, enter N for no. Since overwriting the existing resume file to the other company is not something that we want to do, we can enter N to cancel the operation. And it's as simple as that. Okay, so let's clear the screen. So far, we have only moved single files from one directory to another, but the move command can do much more. In its second form, the move command can move multiple files at a time by listing them here on the command line and ending with a destination directory where we want to move that list of files to. Using the recursive option -R of the list command, we can see the contents of Documents and its subdirectories. So ls-R ~/Documents. So in our parent directory, Documents, there is another directory called Party where we want to move several files. Notice that looking at the contents of Party, there aren't any resources listed underneath. That's because Party's actually empty right now. In our working directory, Messages are the files we want to move. We have Guests, Invitations, and Themes. So to move the files to our Party directory, we can use the command mv guests invitations themes followed by ~/documents/party. Looking at the command line, we got the move command mv followed by a list of items that we want to move and ending with this destination directory where we would like to move these items to. When we list the contents of Party using ls-l ~/documents/party, we can see that the files were successfully moved from Messages to the Party directory. Also, notice the file type here of Invitations. We can see from the D here that Invitations is a directory file type, and these other resources or items here are just regular files. So we can actually move multiple file types at once. We aren't restricted to simply moving files or directories. All of them can be done at once. Let's go ahead and clear the screen. All right, let's move on to our last example, which is to use the third form of the move command to rename a directory. Listing the details of our Messages directory's contents with ls-l, we can see a directory called History. To rename the History directory to Archive, we can enter the command mv history archive. Looking at the command line, we see that we're using the move command mv. We have the existing directory we want to rename, followed by the new directory name we want to rename our history directory 2. If we look at the result, we can see that the directory history was successfully renamed to archive here. Now keep in mind this form only works if the new directory does not already exist. Otherwise, it will simply move one directory to another. Let's change to the Documents directory using cd ~/documents, and let's clear our screen. The next command we'll learn to use is touch, which can be used to create a file or change a file's access or modification timestamp. Here you can see the syntax that begins with the command touch, followed by any options we'd like to pass to it, followed by a list of one or more files. In order to create a file using the touch command, the file argument must not already exist. For example, say that we want to create an About Me page for our website. If we list the contents of our working directory, Documents, with ls-l, we can see that the About file does not yet exist. So let's clear the screen. To create the About file, we can enter touch about.html. Here you can see we're using the touch command, followed by the name of the file that we want to create, which again doesn't yet exist in this directory. So executing that command and listing the contents of our directory again with ls-l, we can see that the About file was successfully created. Now, as a side note, you may have noticed that I added the file extension .html to the file name. A file extension is a suffix appended to the end of a file name beginning with a period followed by one or more characters that can be used to identify what a file is used for. In this case, the About file is a web page that will contain hypertext markup language, or HTML, which will be displayed in a web browser. So that's why I've listed it there. All right, back to the example. Let's see what happens if we touch a file that already exists in our directory. For instance, we just created the About file. Let's enter touch about.html. Now let's list the contents of our directory again with ls-l. So here we can see the last modified timestamp of our About file has changed from what it was before when we initially created the About file. So passing the file name of a file that already exists causes the touch command to change a file's access or modification timestamp. It's important to note here that the touch command does not change the contents of an existing file, just the timestamp. Let's clear the screen. Of course, like other commands, we can touch multiple files at a time as well. Let's list the contents of messages with ls-l messages. Say that we wanted to touch an existing file called greeting, which has a timestamp of October 3rd, 1214. And we also want to create multiple greeting files within the same directory. To do that, we can enter the command touch messages/greeting messages/greeting1 messages/greeting2. Listing the content of our messages directory again, we can see that the timestamp of the previously existing file, greeting, was indeed updated with October 3rd, 1217, since previously it was 1214. We also created several additional files here, greeting1 and greeting2. All right, let's clear the screen. Additionally, we can update the modification timestamps of directories as well. For example, in our working directory documents, we have the directory party with a timestamp of October 3rd, 10:35. To update the modification timestamp of party, we can enter touch party. Listing the contents of the working directory again with ls-l, we can see that the party directory's timestamp was successfully updated. Here, it's now October 3rd, 12:56, whereas before, it was October 3rd, 10:35. You can use the touch command to update a directory's modification timestamp, but you cannot create a directory using the touch command. To create a directory, we must use the make directory command. The mkdir command is short for make directory, and it's used to create one or more directories. Looking at the syntax, you can see we have mkdir, which is the make directory command, followed by 0 or more options, followed by a list of one or more directories that we want to create. If we list the contents of our working directory with ls-l, we see that several directories already exist. We have messages, party, private messages, and the templates directories. To create a directory at our current location using the make directory command, we can enter mkdir courses. Listing our directory contents again with ls-l, we can see that indeed the courses directory was successfully created here. Let's clear the screen. Like touch, the make directory command can be used to create multiple directories at once by passing a list of directory names. For example, say that we want to organize the notes from several online courses that we're taking by creating subdirectories within the courses directory that we just created. To do that, we can enter the command mkdir courses/command line courses/python courses/git courses/sql. Listing the contents of courses with ls-l courses, we can see that all of our directories are there. The last command we'll learn to use is rm, which is short for remove. Looking at the syntax, you can see that we have the rm remove command, followed by 0 or more options, followed by a list of one or more files that we want to delete from the file system. I have to caution you here, be extremely careful using the remove command because it's very easy to delete many files at once, losing hours of work and valuable data. But as you probably guessed, there is an interactive option that can be used to make the remove command a bit safer to use. So I'll be sure to show that a little bit later. Let's begin with listing the contents of our working directory with ls-l. To delete the file memo copy, we can enter the command rm memo copy. Looking at the syntax, you can see that we're using the remove command rm, and we're passing the name of the file that we want to delete from the file system. Listing the contents of the directory again with ls-l, we can see that the memo copy was successfully deleted from the file system. We can also use the remove command to delete several files at once. Let's list the contents of messages with ls-l messages. Here in the messages directory are two files that we want to delete, greeting1 and greeting2. To delete both of them, we can specify the path to each file as an argument to the remove command using rm messages slash greeting1 messages slash greeting2. Listing the contents of messages again with ls-l messages, we can see that both files were successfully removed. In addition to deleting files, the remove command can be used to delete directories as well. ls-l private messages shows the contents of our private messages directory. As you can see, it contains a number of files and directories. Observe what happens if we attempt to delete a directory like we would a file with rm private messages. Instead of the remove command deleting the directory, it returns an error message stating that it cannot remove private messages because it's a directory. Since a directory may contain multiple directories and files, we must pass the recursive option -r to the remove command. The recursive option allows the remove command to descend into any nested directories or files that may exist and delete them. Again, be extremely careful when deleting directories so that you don't accidentally delete something important, losing hours of work or valuable data. To delete private messages, we can enter the command rm-r private messages. Looking at the syntax, you can see we're using the remove command rm. We're passing the recursive option to descend into this directory along with and any other nested directories or files. And the last argument we're passing is the directory we want to delete from the file system. Listing the contents of private messages again, you can see that it returns an error message. Well, that's just because we deleted the directory along with its entire contents. Therefore, the ls command cannot access private messages because the directory no longer exists on the file system. In other words, we just successfully removed private messages along with every nested directory and file contained within it. A safer alternative to deleting files or directories is to use the remove command's interactive option -i. For example, ls-l courses lists the contents of the courses directory, where there is a course called SQL that we've decided not to take after all. So what we would like to do is delete the directory SQL along with any contents it has. To do that, we can enter rm-ri courses/SQL. But let's say instead of entering the command correctly, let's say we leave off the SQL part and execute this command. Because we passed the interactive option to the remove command, we're asked to confirm whether or not to delete each directory. To descend into the directory, we enter Y for yes. To cancel the deletion of the command line directory, we can enter N for no. To cancel the deletion of the Git directory, we enter no. To cancel the deletion of the Python directory, we enter N for no. Now we're asked if we want to remove the SQL directory, so we enter Y or yes to confirm. Listing the contents of the course directory courses Again, we get a list of the remaining courses that we intend to take, minus the SQL directory that we specified, or rather confirmed, we wanted to delete. Thankfully, in this case, we used the interactive option. Otherwise, the courses directory and all of its contents would be gone if we left off this one option here. That wraps up lesson 2 of the command line course. In this lesson, you learned the copy, move, remove, touch, and make directory commands needed to manage your computer's file system. In the next lesson, I'll cover how to use the command line to display the content of files in useful ways, sort the contents of files, filter out repeated file contents, and count the number of lines, words, and bytes within files. If you're serious about improving your knowledge and skills as a developer, then make sure to click the subscribe button and click the bell icon to get notified about more courses like this in the future. Also, remember, I'm creating a PDF of all the commands that I cover in the course. When it's finished, I'll place a link to it in the description. Thanks for watching.